Listen up, get ready, I'm not gonna take no more. There's a revolution, a revelation going on in my soul. Buckle up, get ready, we're not gonna sit back.
Okay, all you citizens of the world, welcome back to Live from the Heartland for the week of July 4th in the year 2025. And we're going to bring on an old friend, the one and only John de Graaf up there in Seattle. Hello, John.
Hello, Mike. How are you?
I'm good, and I'm really glad that you have a new movie out. We thought it was really appropriate for the 4th of July week. We wish things in the country were going a little bit more in a progressive direction, but I think we're all being challenged, and hopefully we will emerge victorious over time. With that said, we're going to talk about your new film, From Sea to Shining Sea. And it's about Katharine Lee Bates, who was a Falmouth, Massachusetts native, went to Wellesley College, and she wrote America the Beautiful. John de Graaf, tell us how you got interested in this topic.
Well, I've always been interested in making films about Americans who made some kind of difference, who took on some of the problems that we face and difficulties that we face, but also had a belief that we could make America better, that it wasn't hopeless. And so they tried to do something about it. And so I've had a series of biographies like that. My last one here about the life of Stuart Udall. But I found out about Katharine Lee Bates' story and found it fascinating because everyone knows, and I thought it would make an interesting television because everyone knows the song America the Beautiful. But everyone sings only the first verse. And they think of it as some kind of gung-ho, patriotic, cheer the troops song like the national anthem. It is anything but that. And what I discovered is that when you look at the three other verses of the song, it's really a critique of American society in the era that she lived, which was during the Gilded Age. It's a critique of the inequality. It's a critique of our imperialism later in the Spanish-American War. And it's a critique of poverty amidst plenty. And she was really a reformer, a supporter of all kinds of important things. And I thought, this is a fascinating story because it will be surprising to people that this song isn't what they thought it was, and that she herself is an inspiring story.
Tell us a little bit more about Katharine Lee Bates.
Well, Bates was born in Falmouth, Massachusetts, right before the Civil War. Her first memory was the assassination of President Lincoln. And this grieved her immensely, even though she was only 5 years old, because even then she believed in Lincoln's fight to abolish slavery. And she wrote about that, things like that as a kid. By the time she was 8 years old, she was writing pieces about the mistreatment of American Indians, for example. And she was a very precocious kid, and she liked to write poetry even as a child. And eventually she ended up at Wellesley College in the second class, starting in 1876. The school was founded in 1875. And there she distinguished herself as, of course, the class poet, but also class president and somebody who was looked up to. And she told a friend at that time, while she was in college, that if she could write a poem that someone remembered after she died, she would consider her life worth living. Well, obviously, with America the Beautiful, that happened. But anyway, she later became a professor at Wellesley College, and she taught there for 40 years. And during that time, she was involved in things like the women's suffrage movement, in the resettlement movement, and the settlement houses, and support for immigrants, and a whole number of progressive causes. During the Spanish-American War, she went to Spain and wrote articles for the New York Times about how Spain had suffered from the war, and she joined the Anti-Imperialist League in Boston, opposing that war, but especially opposing the war in the Philippines, which she thought was just horrific. So it's interesting that President Trump today praises McKinley, while at the same time he played America the Beautiful at his inaugural, because there was no president that Bates despised more than McKinley in his imperialistic designs on places. And she would see the same about what Trump has talked about in terms of Greenland, Panama, Canada, all of those kind of things. She would be appalled by that kind of behavior. She writes in the song America, America, God shed his grace on thee, confirm thy soul in self-control. And this is about not being an imperialistic country.
How did her times? It sounds like a lot of the issues remain from what she was addressing and what we have. How do you compare those, and how do you see those two things together?
Well, a lot of them were similar. The issues of war obviously still remain. We're still out bombing other countries. We're still supporting some pretty horrific things in the Middle East. We are still oppressing immigrants and treating them like garbage. And this is not to say that the border should be open completely or anything like that, but this ICE stuff, this terrible mistreatment of immigrants, would not be tolerated by someone like Bates. She was very opposed to this. We obviously are still dealing with the aftermath of racism. We're still dealing with racism. So we have, and still poverty. In fact, we now have the biggest gap between rich and poor since the Gilded Age, and it might soon be bigger than during the Gilded Age. So all these issues are still there. We have also one huge elephant in the room, one issue that Bates never would have even imagined, and that is climate change, which we don't even talk about now. We're so full of all these other problems.
Yeah, a lot of these problems are because of climate change. I mean, migration, people on the move, hunger, starvation, war. It's pretty intense. How about giving our listeners and our viewers, what is the Gilded Age and how does the song address it?
Well, the Gilded Age is a period between about the end of the Civil War, roughly 1870, until the Progressive Era began right around the turn of the 20th century. So it's a period in which the great robber barons, Rockefeller, Morgan, Carnegie, seized immense amount of wealth, and the American public in general, became rather immiserated. It's also a period in which millions of Americans were immigrating here from poor countries in Europe and elsewhere. And it is the period of Reconstruction, when Jim Crow laws and all these things came into existence. So there are these similarities. Mark Twain called it the Gilded Age because it was such a conspicuous display of wealth in the midst of poverty. So that was Twain's term. But we did something about it. We had the Progressive Era, which really changed things quite immensely, and then later Franklin Roosevelt even more so. But we did something about it, and people like Bates wanted to do something about it. So that's what the Gilded Age was. We're in the middle of another one.
She originally wrote this song in 1893, I believe. And I think from what I've read about it and what I've seen of the movie, she changed the song in 1904. What was the issue that moved her in that direction?
Yeah, even in 1893, she originally wrote about the Gilded Age, may God thy gold refine. That's a metaphor for the fact that we were obsessed with the conspicuous display of wealth, and she thought gold should be something different. She said then, till selfish gain no longer stains the banner of the free. Now, she moderated those words later. She kind of changed them a little bit. She softened them so they weren't so explicit, but that's what she meant. But in 1904, she added words to the song that went, America, America, God mend thine every flaw, confirm thy soul in self-control, thy liberty and law. And this was a direct reference to the Spanish-American War, which she abhorred, and she thought the U.S., which was a former colony itself, and was a beacon of independence, had no business taking over other countries. So she did change the words. She also had a whole line, and there's a whole verse in the song that your audience might be particularly interested in because it's about Chicago.
That was my next question. I was going to say, Chicago is the center of the universe, and I wonder how the song connects to Chicago. Fill us in.
It connects. A whole quarter of the song is about Chicago. So anyway, in 1893, she came west to Colorado Springs to teach college. And that's when she went to the top of Pikes Peak and saw the mountain majesties and the plains, and actually wrote the first verses to the song from her experience on Pikes Peak. But on the way to Colorado, she stopped off in Chicago to meet her partner of 25 years. They lived together in Wellesley. She was another professor, Catherine Coleman, whose family was in Chicago. So Bates met her there, and they continued on together. But Coleman took Bates to the 1893 World Exposition, the Chicago World's Fair, if you will, with this gleaming white city, the marble city. And she experienced this, and she found it beautiful, and like people did, and felt it would be nice to have America to have beautiful cities. But she also found out that right next door, only blocks away from this big alabaster city, as she calls it in the song, "An Alabaster City's Gleam," was the slum where the slum where Jane Addams had her Hull House. And this slum was full of starving, hungry, and desperate people. So she wrote a poem about this, and then she writes in the song, "Thine alabaster cities gleam, undimmed by human tears," because at the Chicago World's Fair, they were dimmed by the human tears that were all around them. So again, this is metaphor. It's poetry. It's not designed to hit you in the face. But the meaning, once you know where she was and what she did, is very clear.
I know that people can find the film online. Are you showing this around the country, and is it going to come to Chicago?
It's not online yet. Just the trailer is online on the website. We hope it is available from a company called Bullfrog Films.
Oh, yeah.
We're hoping to get it especially out to schools, because we really believe it's a great film for high school and college students to learn something about our history. And it's perfect class length, because it's 37 minutes, so it gives a teachers time to talk about it as well. But we are hoping to bring it to Chicago this fall, and probably either in late October or early November. And I've been working with a couple of people there. I think you know Mirko Popatic, and some other folks there, trying to find a venue for that and to show it there, because obviously it has an immense connection to Chicago.
Well, if it comes to Chicago, we'll help promote it, and we'll get to see you in person. If people want to find the trailer, they can go to www.sea2shiningseafilm.org. That's sea2shiningseafilm.org. And just while I'm at it, you can find a lot of information about John's other films, including the film on Stuart Udall that we had him on probably a year or so ago, at www.johnd, that's D-E, Graaf, Graaf.com. Now, how about talking a little bit about, we've kind of had the America the Beautiful and Not So Beautiful theme running through this show today. It is the 4th of July show for the week of 4th of July. How is the song connected to July 4th?
Well, it was published on July 4th, 1895. It's certainly a song that is sung many, many places July 4th. And not to go into this in any depth, but July 4th, this July 4th, the Boston Pops Orchestra will be playing a musical version of my film. They commissioned the narration from the film and video from the film, and they added to that a score by the ragtime winning composer Stephen Flaherty. So they're playing that in their big July 4th concert in Boston, Friday evening. I think it shows the interest in the film, and it is perfect for July 4th because it reminds us of, as Stephen Kinzer, was a New York Times writer, is a professor who wrote about the Spanish-American War, says in the film, it's about my kind of patriotism. It should be our national anthem. By that, he means that it's about a patriotism that doesn't just go rah, 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 America first, and, nobody, God bless America, no one else, et cetera, but it's about making America all that it can and should be, and what most of us believe it should be.
Yeah, no, I like that. I mean, I've always loved my country, been a little critical of certain governments and our practices, but this song with the newly revealed verses that a lot of us don't know really hits the mark for these times. Um, Ray Charles did a version of the song, and it's pretty popular. You hear it a lot. We used it coming into this segment, and we may use it going out. I'm not sure, but what did he want from the song?
Well, Ray Charles wanted America to be, it was one of his favorite songs for sure. He loved it, and he wanted it to be our national anthem. And he spent 6 years off and on lobbying Congress to try to make it the national anthem. Of course, he was unsuccessful, but it's not over yet. We still have a chance to do that once we elect some people to back in power who know what America actually should stand for, and
With
not
principles.
the people who are there now. But the principles, then I think maybe we'll think about making it the national anthem, or maybe This Land Is Your Land, but a song that celebrates the better values of America, not bombs bursting in air and troops marching everywhere and so forth, like the present. I think that's an important thing that we can do.
Yeah, things are pretty rough, and it's hard to be really patriotic given what's going on in Gaza and Africa and Ukraine, not to mention the streets of America with thugs grabbing people off the street, masked bandits, so to speak. I mean, it's really a lot of us who have been active for a long time and seen a lot of negativity in the country definitely see this as the worst of times so far. And it'll probably get a little worse. But
it's funny, in our day, of course, we were very critical of Lyndon Johnson, and justly so, about the war in Vietnam. But I think we now, seeing what we've got today, we look back on Lyndon Johnson and kind of really wish for someone like him.
Tell me a little bit about what patriotism means to you, John.
Well, it means that, if you love your country and you love the ideals of the country, and those ideals were not always, even from the beginning, the best. There were flaws. The people who did them were flawed, but it was at least example at the time of giving people some kind of right, as opposed to the king and the monarchs and all of those. It was a beacon to people from around the world who came here, who made it better in many, many ways. And I want to continue to make it better. Patriotism is about, to use the Army slogan, make your country all it can be. And so people who seem to think that if you don't like everything the way it is, you should get out and go somewhere else, that is not patriotism. That's a fraud. And Mark Twain especially really criticized this kind of phony patriotism that's just about America first. Now, Katharine Lee Bates was not that kind of patriot. She was someone who believed in the rest of the world and in the world as a community who could come together. In fact, in her final speech given to 3,000 people in Boston's Mechanics Hall in 1928, she talked to the crowd and said they should see, when she writes about From Sea to Shining Sea, they should see that as meaning the whole world, all the oceans and people of the world, not just the Atlantic to the Pacific, but the earth is one community from sea to shining sea. And that's what patriotism means to me.
That's nice. I want to ask you a little bit about yourself now, a little bit about where do you come from and how did you get into filmmaking, and then share a little information on some of your other films. I've always been impressed with you from the get over that Vondervogel piece you did. And I keep, every time I see you, I bring it up. But I know you did a book called Affluenza. You did a film. You did a lot. But I'd be curious to know a little bit about where did you start out? Where did you grow up? And what did you do? What led you to the documentary filmmaking?
Well, those who know me best would probably say I came from Mars. But actually,
you and me both.
Actually, I grew up in San Francisco, California. Spent a lot of time in the mountains. My dad took me to Yosemite when I was a kid, and that I fell in love with the national parks and with backpacking and the beauty of the Sierra Mountains. And John Muir's fight to save our public lands, which are again in danger as they always are. Although it's the one decent thing they did. They stripped that thing from the bill, Mike Lee's abominable thing to sell 2 million acres of the public lands. They took that out. And so that was one positive that we got. But I believed in the public lands. I believed in the national. I wanted to be a park ranger when I was a kid, but I ended up going to school, getting involved in the anti-war movement, like you and others, becoming very interested in social change, and then starting to see documentary films and thinking, maybe that's a way I can contribute. I like to write. I was always a writer. Had a radio talk show like you on University of Minnesota radio, and so I finally met an old guy who was 85 then, who was a Corsican immigrant to the U.S., who distinguished himself. He never went past the 6th grade. He was an iron miner who was fired and blacklisted when he tried to start a union, but he ended up as a U.S. congressman. And it was pretty amazing. He distinguished himself in Congress. Later on, went on to be a union leader, and at 85 was still a very dynamic guy. And he had such a good voice that he had a tryout. He was given a tryout for the New York Metropolitan Opera. Now, he didn't make it, but he came very close. They wanted him to try out, which is something. And he could still sing beautifully at 85. So he inspired me. He was the kind of individual that I then wanted to make films about. And I've made many others since, although I've also made a lot of films that have been about big issues rather than about people.
What are some of your big issue films?
Well, the big one was Affluenza, which was about the impact of consumerism on America, on our environment, on our gap between rich and poor, on all of those kind of things. That was kind of my mega success, and it also turned into a book. I also did a film that we shot quite a bit of in Chicago called Running Out of Time, which was about the history of overwork in America and the fight for the 8-hour day and the fight for vacation time and other things, which we are still the only industrial country that doesn't have by law. We're still the only industrial country, the only wealthy country that doesn't have paid sick leave, paid family leave, paid vacation time, all of those things by law. Every other wealthy country and many, many poor countries have those things. I don't know. And of course, healthcare, universal healthcare, we don't have that all the rest of those countries have. So this was a film about that, looking into the whole history of the fight for the shorter work time, vacation time. And I think that was one of my more popular films.
Well, we got just a couple minutes left, John de Graaf, but give me a quickie on how you perceived affluenza and abundance a number of years ago and where that's at today. And then I'm going to ask you, the final question is, I'll do them both. What do you got in the can, or what are you working on?
Okay. Well, I think a lot of people are suffering now. And so the film Affluenza probably would not be responded to the same way that it was in the late 1990s during the Clinton boom. But that wasn't. I didn't mean. I meant.
That was good. That was good.
This maybe it was a Freudian slip. I don't know. But anyway, the country is still hugely affluent. We are a very, very rich country. The problem is now it's just increasingly divided. So you can have one person who has a $50 million wedding. Obscene. I mean, while there are people who can't put food on the table. I mean, this is disgusting. We talk about that in the film Affluenza, but it wasn't quite as bad then. In fact, that was one of the better times in our history. So it's still there. The other question was, what am I doing now? I'm working on a film actually about a different look at affluence. We're obsessed in this country, both political parties, with the whole idea of economic growth. If we grow the economy 2%, 4%, everything is cool. But the problem is we live on a finite planet. You can't keep growing. We have to find some way to make the economy sustainable, or we're going to get rid of ourselves as a species. So it's the story of Herman Daly. It's called Econoclast, an economist who was an iconoclast, essentially a rebel against the idea of economic growth. Herman Daly was a professor at LSU first. He later actually was hired to the World Bank and helped correct some of their bad policies, ended up at the University of Maryland, and is really known worldwide. I was just at a conference in Norway last week, 1,200 people who were working on sustainable ecological economics, if you want to call it. And it was Herman Daly who started that field. So, but unfortunately, neither of our political parties seem to pay much attention to the real environmental impacts of the idea that we have to grow forever. What we need to do is redistribute. We have plenty of wealth already in this society, and if we spread it out a bit, I don't mean everybody has to have the same, but if we spread it out like we did under Roosevelt, everybody could have a very good life in this country without more growth.
John de Graaf, you're a hell of a guy. I really appreciate you being my friend and coming on the show.